In the mid-14th century, people went to bed in good health and woke up dying. Fever struck without warning. Black swellings appeared under the arms, along the neck. Within days, sometimes within hours, entire families vanished. Church bells rang so often that cities had stopped counting the dead. Cemeteries overflowed, streets fell silent. And all across Europe, one terrifying question echoed: was this the end of the world? What people did not know then was that they were witnessing the deadliest pandemic in human history, a catastrophe that would kill up to half of Europe's population and reshape civilization forever. This was the Black Death, and once it had begun, there was no escape. To understand the scale of the catastrophe, one must first understand the height from which humanity fell. The early 14th century was not an age of darkness. It was the apex of the High Middle Ages, a period of remarkable stability, demographic explosion, and interconnection that Europe had not known since the Roman Empire. Thanks to the medieval climatic optimum, harvests had been abundant for generations. Europe's population had nearly doubled in 2 centuries. Paris, Florence, Venice, and London were vibrant, densely populated human hives. And above all, the world was connected. A merchant in Venice could purchase silk that had crossed all of Asia thanks to the trade networks secured by the Mongol Empire, the Pax Mongolica. This vast network, the medieval World Wide Web, moved spices, gold, ideas, and technologies at an unprecedented speed. It was a glorious, animated, and optimistic world. But this interconnection was a double-edged sword. The same caravans and ships that brought wealth would soon deliver the greatest catastrophe in human history. The infrastructure for global disaster was perfectly in place. The apocalypse was born thousands of kilometers from the cobblestone streets of Paris in the vast steppes of Central Asia, probably in the region of present-day Kyrgyzstan or northern China. It was here that a biological agent of formidable efficiency had existed for millennia, Yersinia pestis, a bacterium endemic to populations of burrowing rodents on the steppes, marmots, and ground squirrels. For centuries, it had lived in relative balance with its hosts, far from large human concentrations. But in the 1330s, this fragile balance was broken. A period of ecological stress, severe drought followed by heavy rains, devastated rodent populations. Driven by hunger, infected animals migrated toward human settlements, carrying their fleas with them. The jump from animal to human occurred at trading posts along the Silk Road. The first human victims did not understand what was happening to them. Violent fevers, vomiting, and those painful swellings in the lymph nodes, the buboes, that would give the disease its name. The geographical turning point of this story is the Crimean Peninsula and its magnificent city, Kafr, a fortified colony of the Republic of Genoa, a crucial hinge connecting Asian routes to Mediterranean maritime networks, a cosmopolitan, incredibly wealthy, protected by massive stone ramparts. In the 1346, Kaffa was under siege by the army of Khan Jani Beg, successor to the Mongol Empire. The Genoese, masters of maritime defense, were holding out. But then, a silent killer began to prowl through the Mongol camps. Soldiers were dying by the hundreds, then by the thousands, their bodies blackening before death. The Khan's army was dissolving, not under enemy blows, but under the force of biology. Facing defeat, Jani Beg made a horrifying decision that would change the course of history. In a calculated biological warfare, he ordered the corpses of his plague-ridden soldiers to be loaded onto trebuchets. For days, the sky over Kaffa rained dead bodies. The Genoese defenders watched in horror as pestilent corpses crashed onto rooftops and into market squares. The impregnable fortress had been breached from within. Fleas, abandoning their cold hosts for warm, living bodies, infiltrated the city. Panic gripped Kaffa. The Genoese merchants, understanding that the city was lost, called upon their greatest asset, their ships. 12 galleys loaded with refugees and merchandise and invisible stowaways left the port, sailed through the Bosphorus, and set out into the Mediterranean. These fleeing ships had become vectors of death. The first major European port to fall was Messina in Sicily. When the Genoese galleys arrived, the dockworkers who rowed out to meet them were greeted by a scene of horror. Most of the sailors were dead, their bodies rotting on deck. The few survivors were delirious, covered in black buboes oozing blood and pus. The port authorities of Messina ordered the ships expelled, but it was too late. The true agents of transmission, the black rats ubiquitous on medieval ships and the fleas on their backs, had already used the mooring ropes to slip onto the docks. The speed of infection was paralyzing. The cramped living conditions of a medieval port city acted as an accelerant. Within weeks, the social fabric of Messina tore apart. People fled to the countryside, only spreading the contagion further. News of the great pestilence spread. Other ports attempted to close their harbors to ships coming from the east, but medieval quarantine was a sieve. Greed often prevailed over caution. The Venetians, the most pragmatic of merchants, developed the concept of the lazaretto, islands in the lagoon designated as quarantine zones where ships had to wait 40 days before entering the city. A pioneering measure of public health. But for the first wave, it was too late. Venice's gondolas became funeral barges, stacking bodies in the silent canals. When the plague struck the great metropolises, it did not only kill people, it killed the city itself as a functioning organism. One must understand the terror of facing this without modern science. The finest minds of the 14th century, the physicians of the University of Paris, were overwhelmed. Their frame of reference was not germ theory, but the ancient Greek theory of humors and miasmas. They believed that the air itself had been corrupted, perhaps by a specific planetary alignment of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars that had released noxious vapors from the Earth. Physicians advised people not to bathe, as this would open the pores to the corrupted air. They burned aromatic woods at street corners. They bled patients already weakened by disease. They lanced the buboes, which only accelerated septicemia. Every rational attempt to stop the disease seemed only to feed it further. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio witnessed the devastation of Florence, a city that may have lost 60% of its population, left us chilling accounts of social collapse. The fear of contagion was so great that the most sacred bonds of humanity were broken. Fathers abandoned their sons. Wives left their husbands to die alone. The sick were walled up inside their homes. The sounds of a lively city, carts, merchants calling out, construction, were replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the incessant tolling of church bells, until the bell ringers themselves died. The dead accumulated faster than they could be buried. Consecrated cemeteries were full. Vast mass graves were dug, trenches where bodies were stacked like firewood, layer upon layer. In the 14th century, there was no distinction between the physical world and the spiritual world. An event of such magnitude could only be interpreted as divine punishment, God punishing humanity for its sins of greed, pride, and corruption. People crowded into cathedrals, praying for deliverance, gathering in processions that only accelerated the spread of the pneumonic form of the plague. When prayers failed and priests died just as fast as sinners, a radical and desperate piety emerged. The flagellant movement swept across Northern Europe. Bands of hundreds of men dressed in identical robes marched from town to town. Twice a day, in the public square, they stripped to the waist and flogged themselves with iron-spiked leather straps, hoping to take upon their own flesh the sins of the world. But as the death toll rose, the need for a tangible scapegoat grew darker. A horrifying conspiracy theory took root, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire. Jewish communities were poisoning the wells of Christendom. Despite the official condemnations of Pope Clement VI, mob mentality took over. Pogroms broke out in cities such as Strasbourg, Mainz, and Cologne. Entire communities were rounded up and burned alive. The Black Death unleashed not only biological horror, but also the darkest aspects of human nature. It would be wrong to think of the plague as a purely urban phenomenon. 90% of Europe's population lived in the countryside, and death came to find them there too. Thousands of small villages whose names are today lost were completely wiped out. The manorial system, which depended on a constant supply of peasant labor, ground to a halt. Chronicles describe unsettling rural scenes, harvests rotting in the fields with no one to bring them in, herds of sheep and cattle wandering aimlessly across the landscape, wolves emboldened by human absence approaching villages. The carefully tended medieval landscape was being reclaimed by the wild. By 1350, the plague had reached the northern limits of the continent, Scotland, Scandinavia, and even the small settlements of Greenland, dealing a fatal blow to the Nordic colonies. By 1351, the first catastrophic wave of the Black Death began to exhaust itself. The bacterium had simply run out of accessible victims. The exact toll will never be known, but modern historians estimate that between 75 and 200 million people died across Eurasia and North Africa. In Europe alone, perhaps 50% of the population perished in less than 5 years. Survivors emerged into a world that looked the same but was fundamentally different. Massive depopulation created a severe labor shortage. For the first time in centuries, the peasant held power. Lords, desperate to have their lands worked, were forced to offer better wages and better conditions. The rigid structures of serfdom cracked, and in many places finally broke. The golden age of the worker had begun, born from the ashes. The psychological scars ran deep. Art became obsessed with death. The Danse Macabre, depicting skeletons dragging kings, popes, and peasants alike into the same funeral dance, served as a reminder that death is the great equalizer. The Black Death was the greatest trauma that Western civilization ever endured. It shattered the optimism of the High Middle Ages and proved the fragility of human systems in the face of the power of nature. The society that rebuilt itself was more cynical, more questioning, and forced to reinvent itself. In the end, this road of death cleared the ground for the slow and painful emergence of the modern world. For centuries, the Black Death was treated as a distant medieval nightmare. But empty streets, barricaded homes, a fear of the air itself, does that truly feel like ancient history? Or does it feel painfully familiar? The plague was a test of civilization, and tests have a way of repeating themselves.